Hello everybody, we are back. We are still talking about 1984 by George Orwell, and what I would like to talk about today is a very central, very important concept to this book, right? Without understanding this concept, then much of the rest of the book doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and that is doublethink. So, what is doublethink? Well, doublethink is kind of the further extension of what today we would call cognitive dissonance, right? And cognitive dissonance for us is the result of encountering two irreconcilable truths. So for example, let's say you have a friend, you love your friend dearly, you say they're a wonderful person, you'd stand up for them, you'd vouch for them. And then you find out that your friend has done something terrible, something that you know is awful. You find yourself in a moment where you realize that both of these things cannot be true. Your friend cannot be a wonderful, kind, generous person and also be the person who does these things. And so you have to find a way to reconcile that. And either you make excuses for your friend and say, well, this can't possibly be true. Maybe they're being blackmailed. Maybe there's some other outside influence on them. Or you have to admit that you were wrong, that your judgment is poor, and that you didn't know your friend as well as you thought you did. And honestly, a lot of people would really rather the former because they don't want to think that their judgment is bad or that they make bad friends. So that's what you see in, for example, a lot of incidences where abusers are revealed, especially if they're celebrities. So you think, wow, I really looked up to this person. I can't possibly be that bad a judge of character, so I'm going to make excuses for this person, when in fact, they are, in fact, terrible people. So that is what we experience. This is what everybody experiences all the time. It's part of life. Orwell extended that, and he turned this into an idea that you have to be able to accept and believe two things that are contradictory at the same time. And he lays it out very, very clearly in a scene where Winston is doing his physical exercises, and Orwell kind of lays it all out. There's no subtlety or anything. Let me just read it. It's a little bit long, but I think you'll get the point. To know and not to know. To be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies. To hold simultaneously two opinions which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them. To use logic against logic. To repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, and then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety. Consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. So, what is this, and why does it exist in this novel, and why is it so important to this novel? Well, we don't really understand why it's so important until we get to sort of the end of it, right? Where Winston has been caught and he is being tortured by O'Brien. And O'Brien kind of builds on one of the slogans of the party, which is that who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. And O'Brien says that the purpose of power, the purpose of gaining power and building power and establishing power amidst the party is not for some other end. It's not to control a resource. It's not to make an army of mindless drones. O'Brien says that the purpose of power is power. Full stop. And that's it. So how do you do that? How do you obtain complete power? Well, there's basic stuff like the surveillance state that they've established and things like the thought police. But the party goes deeper than that. They realize that if you can control the evidence that exists of the world, then you control the world. At one point where he's talking to Winston, Winston is really trying to establish that there's a real world out there. There's a palpable, real thing that we call reality. And O'Brien says, show me. What do you mean? And Winston says, well, look at the stars up there. And O'Brien says the following. He says, what are the stars? They are bits of fire a few kilometers away. We could reach them if we wanted to, or we could blot them out. The Earth is the center of the universe. The sun and stars go around it. which sounds pretty nuts. But then he kind of builds on that a bit, and he says, when we navigate the ocean, or when we predict an eclipse, we often find it convenient to assume that the Earth goes around the sun and that the stars are millions upon millions of kilometers away. So for the party, reality is whatever it is convenient to know, whatever it's most convenient to be real. And as long as they control the information that exists, they control reality. And O'Brien says that reality is inside your skull. There is no objective reality. There is no real world that you can point to, that you can touch. It's all in your head, quite literally. So if the party can control what's in people's heads, then they control reality utterly and completely. And they have the mechanisms of, for example, the Ministry of Truth that keeps changing the past. They keep altering when things were done and who did them and who existed and who did not exist. And there is no evidence to contradict that. Like when Winston makes Comrade Ogilvy, and he creates this person out of whole cloth in order to replace somebody who had been executed. And at the end of it, he says that now Comrade Ogilvy exists the same way that William Shakespeare exists, or Julius Caesar exists, right? There's documentary evidence. There might even be photographs. And how do we know Shakespeare was real? How do we know Julius Caesar was real? Because there's documentary evidence. But who made that? Where did it come from, right? Now, in philosophical terms, it's kind of called solipsism. The idea that only you are real. The whole world around you is somehow made up and non-existent. But even O'Brien kind of says, no, that's not what it is. This is literal reality control. And if you can control the reality of your citizens and what that reality is, then you have power over them. And that is it. And there's a great line, which you see more and more popping up today in sort of modern politics, which comes to us from the narration. It says, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." And so what do we see? Again, why is Orwell doing this? Well, again, number one, because I think Doublethink makes his world more plausible. If people can do this, then what the party is doing could conceivably work. But in the real world, of course, this is not possible, right? Even in places like North Korea, with an extraordinarily strong centralized government that says this is true and this is not true, they can't necessarily get directly into people's heads, I assume. But in sort of our world, in the places where we live, we do have people telling us what reality is, or at least what reality should be. They tell us this is what is true. They say that, for example, that immigrants are coming to steal your jobs. And they paint this picture of hordes of, and I'm America-centric here because I'm American, but this picture of hordes of immigrants coming up over the Mexico-U.S. border looking to steal people's jobs. And then in the same breath, or the same sentence, they will say that immigrants are a bunch of lazy scroungers who just want to take welfare and take benefits from the government. So both of these things can't be true. They can't be an industrious horde of workers looking to steal every job from good, hardworking Americans and a bunch of lazy bums. Those can't both be true. But the point is that the person saying those things doesn't like immigrants. That's the point. The two facts that they put together doesn't really matter. But they can believe both of these are true. I don't know, a lot of politicians will sort of pivot, they will change, they will shift, they have to spin things that they said in the past and say, no, what I said in the past, that's not really what I meant. What I really meant was this, and they're counting on us, the citizens, to forget what was said before and to accept what they said at face value. And Orwell knew this. Orwell has seen in his adulthood, he had seen fascist regimes pop up all over Europe, and try to do this, try to rewrite what the truth is and what the truth of their existence was. And so I think that terrified him, the idea that a government could become powerful enough to extend their reach, not just into the history books, but almost into people's minds, so that whatever they said is true has to be true. And the people of Oceania, they go along with it because they have to. They have no other choice. There is no option B for them. And so the most extreme example of this that I really like is during the Hate Week scene, where suddenly the enemy, I think they go from East Asia to Eurasia. They could go from Eurasia to East Asia. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter who they're fighting. But East Asia to Eurasia, they say East Asia was our ally, now they are our enemy. And they're at a whole big rally, and the guy is ranting against Eurasia because Eurasia was the enemy before. Gets a little piece of paper and then switches immediately to East Asia and say, no, East Asia is the enemy. And the people are looking around and they see all these propaganda posters for the wrong country, and they go nuts. They go, oh no, the spies, the Goldsteins have gotten in here and they've put in the wrong information, and they start tearing it down. They immediately, even though they heard moments before that the country that is now their enemy was their ally, they immediately forget it because they have to. Your survival depends on it. So between doublethink, between the control of language, the control of the past, this is how the party consolidates the power that it wants. The party wants to exist forever, irrespective of who's part of it. And this is how they do it. And it is a little terrifying. And once you kind of see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see, like I said, politicians and pundits and business leaders and billionaires trying to tell you what the real world is, you have to check yourself. You have to be mindful, and you have to stop and think, wait a minute, is that really true? Is this in line with what they said before? Is this supported by facts? And it's very easy to not do that because that takes work. But nevertheless, we have to. And I think that's what Orwell really wants us to take away from this book, is that we cannot allow other people to determine what our reality is. We can't allow other people to tell us what's real when we know that that's not real. And Winston kind of sums that up in writing in his journal. He writes, freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows. So to have a free mind means to be able to acknowledge the truth and the reality of what exists in front of you. And that's hard. It takes work. But I think Orwell is painting us a picture of the worst that could happen if we don't do that. So, those are my thoughts on Doublethink. Like I said, it's very important for the book, and I kind of wanted to talk about it. So we'll go on to another topic next. But in the meantime, thank you very much for sticking around. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.